Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1496 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by the good folks at Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with Game Time. And I wanted to tell you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe anywhere you get your podcast, places like Spotify, Apple, YouTube, etc. And I'm joined today by my good friend Mark Schindler, who covers the NBA and WNBA and college basketball and the NBA draft everywhere, basically on the internet, including with Dine With Me, Tag the Roll podcast, WNBA.com, etc. Mark is fantastic. He's joining me for a two-part episode. There's actually going to be part one that you're about to listen to right now, covering some Hawks stuff, as well as the NBA draft and what the Hawks are going to be looking to do at 15, a little bit at 46 as well at the end of the podcast. But a good time to go ahead and tell you to check out the rest of the archive. We've been talking about the draft quite a bit in recent days. I did a two-part episode with Zach Milner earlier this week, who actually is the co-host of Mark's at Tag the Roll. I did a sort of bonus podcast, more of a mailbag style news rumor podcast that dropped on Wednesday afternoon. There was a Locked On NBA mock draft that went into the feed on Thursday morning. I've had Glenn Willis on the podcast multiple times in recent days, Richard Stamen, Ben Pfeiffer. But a very, very busy time. I think this might be the record as far as non-emergency podcasts in the same week, but we're churning out content because the draft is coming very, very quickly. It's going to be next Thursday, so we're less than a week away from the draft at this point in time, and a lot to get to on today's podcast. Again, it's going to be part one of two with my friend Mark Schindler. Without any further delay, we'll have the intro. I'll be back with myself and Mark talking about the NBA draft, the Hawks, and everything else in between.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am joined now by a good friend, a returning guest, and a genuine basketball expert across various platforms. Mark Schindler is here. Hello, sir. How are you?
Brad, I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm well. I should joke this now. I think you are one of the people who has as many or more jobs than I have. So congratulations to you on that. Most of mine are kind of in the same vein. You cover the WNBA, all kinds of stuff. So you're a very busy man. I appreciate you taking some time, especially this close to the draft in the middle of WNBA season 2. We're talking about a week or so before the draft, and it's a little bit crazy. The rumor mill has begun. I'm sure you've seen some of the stuff. I guess thankfully, or maybe not thankfully for me, the Hawks have not had a huge rumor yet. There's been little bits of things everywhere.
Podcast though, so there's a
yeah, exactly. There's still time. But before we get to some draft stuff, I want to kind of get your thoughts on the Hawks in general right now, because on one hand, they have this roster that's kind of set. They have 10 guys under contract. It's their top 10 guys. On the other hand, I think almost no one expected them to kind of just run it back. So what do you think of when I ask you about the Hawks? Like, where's your head at with the Hawks right now? Draft, no draft, organizationally, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean this in the nicest way possible too, but like I just spent the last 2 weeks in Atlanta because I'm moving there, as you know.
Yep.
And I think I thought about the Hawks once while I was there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at with this team right now. And I mean that again, I mean that in the nicest way possible without trying to sound disrespectful. That's very indicative to me of where this team is at. I think that they need to make some real moves. Exactly like you said. I think for me, I'm going to really struggle to look at this offseason as a good offseason if they don't finally make some kind of decision with John Collins. I feel like I've felt that way for the last 2 years because it's felt like, it's been there, it's been impending. And especially with how this last year went for him, maybe Quinn has some different idea of how things can go. But at the same point, I just think when you look at how everything else is, what their spot is like at the 5 and how difficult it can be to kind of mix and match some of their lineups with the kind of player John is. And I think John is really, really good. We've talked about this before, but I just continue to be in that place of, okay, well, I think for them to really thrive, it's time to move in a different direction with the way that things are going. That would be kind of my first sentiment there.
Sure.
And then on top of it, everything else just needs to be about maximizing their 2 players that they have on near maxes in Trey and DeJounte. If we're not, if you're not taking those steps forward with this and what are you doing? And they're in a weird spot too of okay, they're kind of in between, they have, like you mentioned, they have a set core, but also they're not in the upper crust of the Eastern Conference. Maybe that changes with Obviously, I mean, that's why they made a coaching change. I think it's a lot more than just coaching. But they're just in a weird spot of like, they very much need to make something shake because they can't run it back, just like you said.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am too. And it's like not a sexy answer. I think listeners get mad at me when I say that. Like, my only conviction is that they won't run it back. And I do believe that. I'll be shocked if all 10 guys that I'm talking about that are under contract are on the roster a month from now. I will fall on the floor. I'll be very, very surprised. You focus on John. That's the national focus. It seems to be almost always on John, and that makes sense. He's been on the block for literally 3 years. It's wild. And I've made the point, and I'm not even sure if it's controversial at this point. I think the only way they could really keep John is if they move on from Clint and kind of do a little bit of an interchange there, play John a little bit more at the 5, play him more with the Kongwu. And even then, that's kind of a half measure in that I talked to somebody that knows things today. I would tell you who it was. I will not say it on the air. And they had the same thought. Like, it's almost like if they can't find a deal they like for John, like the solution kind of like that is to go ahead and move on from Clint. And that kind of makes you at least have some thought process that you could start to maximize John again. Because like you said, he's a good player. I think everybody knows that. It's just that they're not using him in the way that he has to be used. I did a whole show about that recently with my friend Glenn Willis, but it's this weird situation. And I think even on his side, like, I'm sure he's ready for this to be over. This entire, never ending cycle of will I be traded or will I not be? What's my role going to be, et cetera. And like, it's not only that, but it does kind of have to start with really the front court in general. But I think Collins be the most obvious example of that. Today's show is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs is fantastic, bringing fit, comfort, and versatility to the table with their products. I feel great and comfortable in my own skin when I wear Birddogs gear, and Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you that sculpted look that you're looking for. They fit much better than regular shorts that happen to be made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs also fixes that issue by inventing their cloud knit fabric. It looks just like khaki, but also stretches, giving you that slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any kind of movement. They also have anti-sweat wicking fabric to keep you cool and dry all day long. In the end, Birddogs makes awesome products, and you're going to want to check out all of what they have going on at birddogs.com/lockedonnba. When you get there, use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA as well. When you do this, use that code, you get a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order with Birddogs. One more time, the place to go is birddogs.com/lockedonnba.
Yeah, exactly. Because like you mentioned too, like I think people will look at that and be like, well, yeah, just move on from Clinton. I'm like, well, Clinton was like their second best player for large stretches of last year.
Yep.
Obviously, again, like as he kind of does every year, like he can have some ups and downs, but largely he was really good. And I think if you remove him, I think that just craters the defense from where it got to respectable last year. And I think that was mostly because of him and what he was able to do anchoring the back. And I think if you remove that, that's easier said than done to be like, well, look, we're so much better. Because as much as I love Onyeka and what he can be, like he's still a lot more theoretical as a really good player than there yet. And I think part of what could be really huge this next year for their growth, like they have guys who could really pop with a new coaching staff and in a new environment and with another offseason of development. But like you can't bank on that just happening and be like, well, we're going to be better next year because we're going to make you be better. Like it's just,
yeah. I do think that and I understand this thought process. Like, I think there's a lot of maybe around the team hope in that Quinn can change a lot of things. And I think that's reasonable. I think, like you said, it's the reason why they made a coaching change. I do believe that this team would be better than it was last year, just with another year and with Quinn. That does make sense to me, but how good the team is a different question. Like, better than last year is not where they want to be. I mean, they have a lot of money invested. There's a whole tax concern that I will not talk to you about in this podcast, but like they have a lot of money committed. They have 10 guys under contract, all this stuff. And I don't think that anyone, including Quinn and Trey and Tony Ressler, whoever's going to be satisfied with a half step forward by running it back. Like, that's not really going to work. So, I'm not going to ask you to tell me what the big changes are going to be, but I do want to ask you about the young guys real quick. Mm-hmm. You mentioned guys who could pop under Quinn. Obviously, a lot of focus on the last 2 first-round picks, AJ and Jalen. I know you talked about them a lot as draft prospects. Jalen had a really good second season after kind of a lost rookie season that was not his fault. AJ was really good by rookie standards. and I'm sure you can understand this, and you'll definitely hear it as you move here. That means in Hawks land that they have to start and play 35 minutes a game now because that's what happens. So what do you make of them and kind of how this whole thing shakes out? Because DeAndre Hunter is a kind of a question mark too. They have a lot of these. Sadiq Bey is here. They have all these individual parts.
That's what made it so weird too, because I thought for me the idea was not to the same extent that the Pacers did, because I think the Pacers was like more of a teardown. Obviously like more on the fly, and it was like kind of just a one season thing. But I think with the Hawks, I was like, all right, bring in Quinn, kind of refresh the air. Obviously they brought in DeJounte, and you know, things just didn't pop this year. So trade off some of the veteran players and try and focus on development while being very competitive still. And I think then they make the Bogdan re-signing. And I like Bogdan Bogdanovic, but not at the number that they signed him at. And you know me, I don't give a shit about numbers. Like,
yeah,
I will, as long as it's like close enough, like fine, pay the guy. But the numbers that he got with the injuries that he's dealt with and what his play has fallen off to, I was like, I do not see it, especially for me. I was like, okay, I think Bogdan is the guy. Maybe you try and send him to another team and say, hey, you know, like, we're going in a different direction. Obviously, it was a big part of their Eastern Conference Finals run, but things have just changed. I'd rather see younger guys in the wing group. And now it's like, well, okay, we have this guy who we're paying what, like $25 million next year? It feels, it's not that much. I think
it's less than that. But
it's like 20, but it's regardless. Not to get too exaggerative, but I think like to me that was one of those ones where I was like, I don't understand that process at all.
Yeah, I think it was basically that they thought it was a tradable number, but for a guy has the knee issues and all that, and yeah, they've had some conflicting moves. Not that I like that deal more than you did, which I think is a low bar to clear based on what you just said, but it doesn't kind of jive with everything else. To your point, like they bring in Sadiq,
it wasn't awful, but it was just for where the team is at and how this year went. It just very much felt like kind of a just like a weird divergence from where everything else was going.
Makes sense. And yeah, they have these young guys who I think that everyone agrees can be better and will be, you would hope, with AJ and Jalen. And but there are guys in front of them. You know, if they move Collins for, you know, I'm not even going to call it a rumor. Jake Fisher reported today that there had been talks at some point between the Hawks and Mavs. Basically, it's almost a salary dump for Collins to get Davis Bertans back in a deal to save money, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you do that, like, okay, it's Jalen Johnson time in a lot of ways. It's Sadiq Bey in a lot of ways because you can't rely on Davis Bertans. But I don't know. I my guard is up on whatever they do with Clint or John or both. They're probably not going to get a ton of NBA help back, I would guess. Yeah. It's going to be more cost cutting and all of that stuff. So it kind of leaves on the bright side for the draft. There's some potential openings because I think it was reported by ESPN the other day that the Hawks are having trouble getting guys in for draft workouts because they have these 10 guys and they have this weird situation where, like, if you're a potential lottery pick, do you want to go to Atlanta and have 10 guys in front of you and all this stuff? So as we go to the draft a little bit, I mean, 15th in this draft is not a bad place to be, I don't think. But what do you think of this slot? And, like, obviously they could move around if they wanted to, up or down. But do you think they can get kind of a useful player there? And how do your tiers break down around where the Hawks are?
Yeah, I think there's like 5 or 6 guys to me who are all like very high end players in this draft. I think actually cutoff for me is probably 7 is where I'd be at. And then there's like a little bit of a mid tier from like the top, like the middle of the lottery. And then I think from there on out, though, I actually do like the depth of the late lottery. But the problem is, like, when you're talking about like I think you're looking at more guys who, okay, they're late lottery because they have talent, but also like there are some very clear flaws in their game that maybe they have a lower floor or their ceiling's a little bit more capped. So I think in general, when you're looking like that, how many of these guys are going to be able to, not that you have to be an immediate impact player coming into the NBA, but I think for a team that would like to get an immediate impact player, like when Taylor Hendricks was slated to be a guy who was more of, like, for me, mid to late lottery. Now it seems like I don't necessarily agree with how high he's getting mocked now. I get some people, because some people do really like, immediate impact. I'm not as much on that. At least, it just depends on the team for sure. But like for me, getting another like versatile forward, somebody who can play 3-4, who can just be part of diversifying the lineups a little bit, is what I'd really like to see. So The long story short is I think there are solid options, but none of them are really going to fix anything for the Hawks.
Yeah, and I always say that rookies are not good. That's the kindest way that I will put it. Most of the time, there are exceptions. I think AJ actually helped them in certain ways this year, and that was about as good as it possibly could have gone for a mid.
Yeah, and not to cut you off, but I think
no, go ahead.
Part of that is like that's the thinking for me. Like I agree, like generally rookies are not going to be, immediate positive impact players, but I think it's more of like, okay, well, can you work the idea of what they do into what you're doing consistently? And I think when you look at AJ, like, okay, well, they went from having nobody who could really shoot off screens and off movement to like, hey, we have somebody who we can literally build sets around because he's that good of a shooter. And if you're able to get somebody like that, like I know it's not like the sexy name. I'm very high on him personally. But Jordan Hawkins to me is a guy who like I would probably have more questions about, if you're pairing him up with that backcourt, just given what, like, unless they really want to play a lot of 3-guard, I'd be kind of a little bit more like hesitant on him for the Hawks. But in general, like, especially when you think about like pairing him up with Onyeka, somebody who's an awesome DHO partner and, kind of evolving as a playmaking hub, like, I think that kind of stuff is really interesting. And that's somebody who, again, I don't think I actually would be pretty high on him being an immediate impact guy as a rookie. And I do think that there's a lot more to his upside than he tends to get credit for in draft circles. But exactly, like you're talking about more like specialists in that area when you're talking about guys who are going to come in and have more of an immediate impact or be able to be closer to that.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. If you've been trying to find tickets to a big event at the last minute, it can be stressful. Probably not the best idea for your wallet or your emotional state. After all, buying tickets should not be a hassle, and with Game Time, it really isn't. Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater. You can avoid stress, start getting hyped for the fun that you're actually going to have at the event because Game Time has killer deals and the best price guarantee. Summer is here. There are all kinds of events around me in Atlanta. I'm sure there are around you as well. And with Game Time, it can be really easy to find awesome deals. Plus, you can also see the images of where your seat's going to be when you get to the event, and they have protection if your event happens to be canceled. Forget all the months of planning in advance. There are tickets right up to the day of the event at Game Time. The Game Time guarantee also means they go the best possible price. If you find tickets in the same row in the same section for less, you'll be credited 110% of the difference with Game Time. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy tickets just a matter of seconds. And those tickets will be sent directly to your phone to make things very easy on you. Download the Game Time app right now. Create an account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account with Game Time. Redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I was going to ask you about Hawkins, actually, so let's stick there for a second. On one hand, like you kind of referenced it there might be a little bit of a fit concern with the current backcourt in that, there are some deficiencies potentially defensively. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but on the other hand, like the shooting is really, really interesting. I almost want to pair him with Grady Dick because there seems to be, I'm surprised, but it seems like Grady Dick could actually get to this range now. I thought he was going to be gone by this point the last few weeks, but I saw him mocked there. I can't remember where today, but a reasonable, mainstream place had him mocked to the Hawks. I was like, oh, okay, that's lower than I've seen him to this point. Not that you have to compare them together, but I had that thought, like these two, shooters, for lack of a better term, and they have some other weaknesses. But like you mentioned Hawkins, he's a guy I haven't talked about a lot because I don't love the fit on the first blush, but also, I don't want to say this. You don't want to not take a guy because you have Bogey. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like he doesn't really fit on a team that has Bogey and AJ already on it, but you can't draft because of Bogey. Like, so anyway, I'll tee you up there. What do you think about Jordan Hawkins beyond what you just said?
Yeah, no, I think for me, he definitely has like the size concerns. Like I think he's somebody who will, against bigger 2 guards, like if he has to play against, like playing against a guy like Bogdan, I think he would actually really struggle because Bogdan is really strong. He's really good at getting under people and getting to his spots, especially when he's healthy. He's been capable of doing that. So I do think there's going to be some stuff there, but generally I feel pretty good about like his off-ball instincts. I think he's a really good screen navigator at his size. And he competes. Like he has really solid functional strength, and he's going to be extremely he will work his butt off to not be a negative. So I automatically am just kind of bought into somebody who can do that. Especially because if you think about it too, he's not going to be the first guy getting targeted for the most point
no.
on this. And even then, like I think he's just somebody who, like, even if he's put in a screening action or like asked to, or like a defense, an offense is trying to, kind of put him into something. I think that he's somebody who is competing to get back into the play, and he doesn't just die on, initial contact. And that matters to me a lot. I think it's just more so like I think the offense is that good. Like I think that as good as AJ is, I think he's Jordan's a better movement shooter coming out of college than AJ was. Like AJ was a good shooter. Like I think it was more about like what he could do as a pull up threat and kind of creating for himself. And I think Jordan is so much more about what he can do with moving without the ball and being that kind of threat as well. And then you go off that too. Like I think he's got a little bit better of a feel for the game than AJ. Like I think AJ's feel for the game is fine. It looked honestly a little bit better this past year than it did at Duke because he was just I thought the system was a lot better for him. But Jordan is like, he still needs to work on repping out some of the stuff on the second and third level. I think that's going to be the biggest swing skill for him is, how much he can become a 3-level scorer. But with how good the 3-point shooting is and how like the things that he's shown as a playmaker out of drawing two to the ball, I'm really confident, especially on him, being more of a second side guy, playing off of Trey or playing off of DeJounte. I feel really good about him being able to consistently make those reads and go from there. And like, I'm really confident in developing finishing for guys. Like some guys it may just never come for, but he put on, I think like 15 pounds between his freshman and sophomore year. I think that's the continued track for him. I don't I'm not expecting him to end up looking like, Luke Kuechly out there, but I am expecting him to he'll probably round out a little bit more and get stronger. And I think a lot of it is figuring out balance and pacing and how to attack with more tempo. And that takes normally a guy's entire rookie contract to get through that. So it will take some time to get there, but I do think there's legitimate secondary, saying star feels loaded, but I do think he's a guy to me, if he averaged 20 points per game a couple seasons in the league, it wouldn't be crazy to me. I think that he's he has the potential to be that level of player. I think he's very much in sort of the KCP mold, but he's a better shooter coming out.
Do you think he can, obviously this is a very broad question intentionally. Do you think he can defend enough? Because in Atlanta, that'd be the primary concern I would have. The offense I don't really worry about too much. It's that if you put him on the court with Trey, or especially with Trey and DeJounte, that'd be pretty small, obviously. But what do you think of his defense in general with Hawkins? Because that's kind of, I think, where he might not that his make or break. I think he can be a good NBA player, even if he's a bad defender, honestly, because he's pretty skilled, like you just laid out. But for the Hawks, they kind of need to avoid another huge target on their backs if they can help it on defense.
Yeah, I agree. I feel I generally have liked his defense a lot more than I think he tends to get credit for. Because again, you look at him, you're like, oh, well, he must get eaten alive on defense. And I generally think he's going to be someone who always probably trends more towards being average, just until he gets stronger. But
you can take average. Average would be fine for what he is, by the way.
I think the best way to put it for me is he is generally a pretty good off-ball defender. I just think the issue is more on, okay, what happens if he does have to deal with some size mismatch stuff? I think he's, at least for his rookie year for sure, I think he's pretty straight up should just be guarding 1s and 2s. And so that makes it a lot more, especially when, if you have Trey and DeJounte on the floor, how do you make that happen? Because I still generally, we haven't talked about DeJounte in a minute. I just am lower on his defense in general than I think.
Oh, Mark,
has been.
I think Hawks fans got tired of me talking about how much I was very low on DeJounte's defense this year. So I think we are aligned on that. He was. I thought he was pretty flat out bad this year defensively, to be honest. So yeah, I'm with you.
I probably wasn't at bad. I just think the great plays look awesome, and he's very gamble heavy, and I think that worked for that Spurs team when he made all defense, but he has lost a little bit of a step since then. Understandably, he had the injury. But also he generally hasn't been as good guarding up as I think he used to be. And maybe with him having the ball in his hands less, which that doesn't seem to be where they're headed towards, that would be less of a thing. But and I'm not just trying to make this a slander DeJounte Pod. He does really good things defensively. I just think for this team, him covering all of Trey's mistakes in the backcourt is not what I think it got made out to be at points. But point being, so I do think it makes it very tough lineup wise in some ways to make Jordan work. But at the same time, I think one of the things I try and weigh more defensively now is how important it is to make baskets. That sounds so dumb, but I feel every time I talk to a coach, when it's about, like, oh, well, defense just kind of wasn't working today. What do you think the biggest factor was, or what hurt? Like, we're one and done in offense. Like, it was the same way of like talking about, like, again, very niche reference, but I know you're going to get it, like Michigan State football in the mid 2010s. Like, okay, well, our offense just went 3 and out and we had to have the defense on the field for 75% of the possessions. I wonder why we lost the game. Like,
yep.
I think part of it, like just having the ability to be more efficient on offense or open things up more, does matter for being better defensively. So I know that's a reach, but I generally feel
it's not. I don't think it is.
Best way for me to put it, he's not. He's a solid enough defender where I at least track him being such that I would not be, I would at least think about it, even with Bogdan on the roster.
I know I mentioned him briefly a second ago, but I want to ask about Grady Dick because he's a guy that, for reasons that I thought he was going to be off the board, probably I haven't talked about a lot on this podcast. I've written about him other places and stuff like that, but I think he's at least conceivably available for the Hawks potentially. Not the same player as Hawkins, but similar appeal as far as the shooting is concerned. The defense was interesting at times. I don't think it was as bad as it was made out to be, kind of like Hawkins in some respects. But yeah. Do you like I guess you have to go tell me who you like better, but what do you make of Grady Dick as a prospect and also the fit in Atlanta?
I really like Grady. And much like you, I've been a little bit, I think part of it's been people are getting enamored with guys who are working out well. And so they're raising up because of, what execs have to say on the phone. But I think for me with Grady, like, he's somebody who I felt better about as the year went on. Like, it's easy to undersell how difficult it is to go from playing like a regular defense to like, hey, we're going to play no middle defense like Kansas did this year. Like, that's really difficult to adjust to. And I talked to Grady about this. I think probably last month on a Twitter Spaces, like talking about like, what was it like trying to adapt and play defense at the college level? Because like point blank period, watching him, like, he was a fish out of water his first
early on,
probably month. Like,
yep.
And then they hit early Big 12 play, like probably 4 or 5 games in, and he's like, hey, he's starting to kind of find his way. He's making plays again. He's not getting beat the same way he was, especially going back to work. Because I think it's easy to look at, like, especially when you're watching a defense that you're not used to watching, it's like, oh, this guy's getting beat backdoor a lot. I'm like, okay, well, why? Like, I've never thought that Grady has like bad awareness or that it's like him just not paying attention. I just think it's really easy when you're a new kid coming in playing in a Power 5 conference. It's really easy to get like kind of overwhelmed with dealing with some of that stuff on the defensive end. And I think he got a lot better at it. And I think there are going to be some things like the screen navigation really needs to continue getting better. I do think he got better at points throughout the year. I don't think he got back to it as much as the year went on. Like, he improved on that. And I also think he's got awesome hands. Like, he's really good at, even if he is getting beat, which, yes, you never want somebody to get beat, but if he is getting beat by virtue of being 6'7" and having a plus wingspan, like, he's got really good coordination and pulls off some really impressive back taps and steals. And that's part of, like, for me, like, just to unveil it, like, I would pick Grady over Jordan, especially for the Hawks. I think honestly, I think kind of anywhere I would pick Grady over Jordan. But I think, like, for the Hawks, when you're looking at a team, like, even if I would say Jordan is a better defender at this stage than Grady, but Grady has the ability to come in and just by virtue of being bigger, like, you can trust him to be on the court more, or at least try and put him out on the court more. And that's without really having a lot of offensive fall off. Like, he's really good moving without the ball. He's an exceptional cutter. I'm a believer in the shot, like, just hitting from day one. I'm probably less optimistic on some of the on-ball stuff than others have been, which is why I was like, I've been teetering around like top 10 with him the entire year. I think he was like around 9 and 12 for me the entire year. Some people got higher than that. I was never quite there because I'm not like a huge believer in his handle or bursts off the ball. But point being, like, I think that there is some ability for him to continue growing in that. Like, again, like, he's 6'7", really high release point. They did it a little bit at Kansas, and I think you saw it more with him at Sunrise when he was playing in high school, where, he'll get opportunities to same like kind of like we saw with Klay Thompson in the NBA as he evolved. Like, okay, if they put somebody smaller on you to try and run you off screens and stick to you, well, maybe we just throw in a post up, and it's like, okay, well, you're just so tall. You have this high release point. This guy can't guard you. Like, I do think there's room for that to grow, but that's going to take more time than I think it gets credit for. It's a lot of words to say. I really like Grady Dick and think he'd be a good fit for this team.
I like him too. And he's a guy that, again, I will admit, I kind of not crossed off, but just was thought, all right, he'll probably be gone. And now I think he might actually fall. So we will see. All right, that is it for part one of this two-part episode with myself and Mark talking about the NBA draft, the Hawks, and everything else. Part two should be available in your podcast feed of choice right now, so please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, YouTube on the video side, anywhere you get your podcasts. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Follow my Patreon work, patreon.com/BT Rowland, and we'll see everybody next time.